morning. Welcome back to Tom's Tall Tales and True Stories. I'm at one of the places. We happen to live right near the shores of the Hillsborough River that flows into Tampa Bay. And behind me is the river. I love coming here just to get away, and to be by myself and look at nature and watch the birds on the water, the ducks and other types of birds, and often even see some alligators floating by. So if you see an alligator sneaking up behind me, please give me a call right away and let me know. I had a neighbor here actually catch an alligator fishing, and took it out and ended it up right over there behind me, or behind you, on the picnic table behind you. And I got a video of that alligator. That was only about a couple months ago, so maybe I'll share that with you at the very end of this podcast today. This podcast today, in my mind, and I've been thinking about this one for a very long time now, and hesitant to do it because it's so vital to my spiritual journey. It's the significant lane-changing event of my life in regards to my spiritual journey. And I'm going to share that with you today. It's a difficult story to tell, but it's probably the most important story I have to tell, and I want to share it with all of you today. But before I do that, let me give you a little background. The year was 1983, and my wife and I had 4 boys at the time. By this time, after Michael, you've heard about Michael and you've heard about Jay. Our son John was born. I think I mentioned him in one of the most recent podcasts because it was his birthday. And then my son Ryan was born in 82. So in 1983, an unusual event happened. The unusual event is that every year in June, I would run in Grandma's Marathon, which is goes from Two Harbors, Minnesota, basically all uphill to Duluth, part of it downhill, but it seems like most of it's uphill. It goes along the shore of Lake Superior, and it ends up at Grandma's restaurant in Duluth, Minnesota, and thus the name Grandma's Marathon. It's probably still going today. It's one of the bigger races in the Minnesota, Wisconsin area, and lots of people come. Matter of fact, even back in the early 80s when this took place, every year I would run in it, and some years my older brother Pat, who you've met now, would run in it with me. And so we would train for months and months for Grandma's Marathon, and it was a big event, and it kept getting more and more popular, so that they had to go to a lottery system, similar to the draft lottery system that they went to during the Vietnam War, in order to, try to fairly decide who could be in the race and who doesn't, because virtually everybody's trying to get in the race, far more than they can accommodate. So I would send in my registration form by mail and time it so that it would end up getting there and opened on the day that they chose to decide the 20, however many people were in the race. So this particular year in 83, unlike every other year before, for some reason, my registration was not selected. It didn't win the lottery, so to speak. And I was very, very disappointed. I was going to miss out on something that I had worked hard to prepare for all year, and also really looked forward to doing. However, fate is fate, and you gotta make the lemonade out of the lemons, right? So I went to my wife, and we've now been married for 10 years. And I said, look, this is our 10th anniversary this year. how would you like to go on a cruise? We've never been on a cruise. So she agreed, and we decided, and we booked ourselves for a cruise for June at the same time as Grandma's Marathon was taking place. And this cruise was going out of Miami, Florida, and it was going to be in the Caribbean. We went to St. Thomas and went to Nassau. And then we had planned for the Thursday of the cruise to have a renewal of our vows at the ship. And there was a ship's chaplain who also happened to be a Catholic priest, and we were both Catholic. So it was perfect. And we got it all set up, invited some people from the cruise to come to it. There was a couple other couples doing the same thing, so we were all going to do it jointly, and that was the plan. However, as life happens, sometimes plans don't work out. And I'll tell you what happened to that renewal of our vows in a little bit as I continue this story. But first, I have some really, really good news to share with you. And that is, I've been talking to you about my third book in the Crowning series, which I'm holding right here. All of the books that I had received previously were bought up quickly with the deal that I made with all of you in March. So I had every single book purchased that I had. So I ordered 50 more books, and they just arrived a few days ago, all 50 of them. And so I'm ready to go with more orders. By the way, how do you like my t-shirt? Let me get a little closer so you can see it. Okay, I made this just for this event. And this is the back of the shirt. It's my Relentless Resistance t-shirt. Okay, and no, I'm not selling it because I'm going to have to sell at least 4 books just to pay for the shirt. So it's, you know, when you make a shirt, just one shirt at a time, and they charge you a lot. But that's not why I'm here. I wanted to tell you that if you're interested in purchasing this book or the 2 previous books to the series, it's the Crowning series. And this particular book, the third and final, the finale of the story, is called Relentless Resistance. And so I really, really welcome you to check it out by going to my website, which is feely.life, and then go to the bookstore. That's one of the pages, and you'll see this book, and you'll see the other books as well that are for purchase on my website. So I just wanted to let you know that they're all ready. I have them. I can deliver them to you as soon as you order them. I'll have them in the mail. Okay? All right. Now, let's go back to my story. So I told you that we were going to have on Thursday night of the cruise. It was a Saturday to Saturday cruise. And we had gone to St. Thomas, a beautiful place, loved it, in the Virgin Islands. And while we were on the cruise, this particular cruise had you scheduled for dinner, and they had, you know, different schedules for different people. So and they assigned you to a table. So you had the same table for every dinner and every breakfast and every lunch, and you had the same people assigned to the table. So you get to know the people who are on the cruise and have been assigned the same table of you pretty well, because you're eating 2 or 3 meals a day with them. So I got to know this woman named Cheryl. She was about, I'm going to guess, mid-50s, and she was traveling with her 21-year-old daughter. Her name was Lori, and Lori was a college. She was in college. I think she was a sophomore at the time. And they were traveling after her husband and her father passed away from cancer. And so they were trying to get away from all the incredible pressure and just relax for a while and enjoy a cruise afterwards. And so it was part of their therapy, I think, to take this cruise together, because it was a very emotional time for them. But they also loved life. Now, one of the things I learned in our discussions during dinner was that Cheryl was an avid scuba diver. And there was another man, I don't remember his name, but he's crucial to this story. So let's just give him a name of Ted, okay? I have no idea what his real name is. I've forgotten that. But let's say Ted. Ted was also a diver and was even more experienced, I believe, than Cheryl. So the two of them really hit it off. You know, they had something in common, and they chatted quite a bit about going scuba diving. They wanted to go diving in St. Thomas, but that wasn't possible. So the last stop on this cruise was in Nassau, and they were pretty sure that they could hire somebody to take them out to go diving, to rent the equipment that they would need. And so it happened that over the winter in Minnesota, where I lived at the time, I was also taking scuba diving lessons. However, being in Minnesota in the winter, those lessons were in a swimming pool, in an indoor pool, because there's no way you could do it outdoors, not in Minnesota in the winter. So I had just finished that course and got certified. So I had my certification license-like thing so that I could also rent equipment. But I had no experience outside of being in a swimming pool. No open water experience whatsoever. So I was a little bit nervous about this. This is going to be my first true dive. When we got to Nassau, and it happened to be the same day, it was a Thursday, it was the day of our anniversary. That evening, we were having our ceremony on the ship to renew our vows. And so early in the morning, everybody disembarked from the ship and went on their various ways. Lori was a golfer. Matter of fact, she was quite a good golfer and had aspirations to become a professional golfer and golf in the LPGA. She had just taken second place, I think, in the NCAA tournament as a sophomore, and was hoping to win that championship the following year. So she was very, very good golfer. Now, my wife she's a great athlete, so she was a four-sport star in college, but golf was not one of them. But she was more than happy to go golfing with Lori, and so they set sail for Paradise Island, where there was a beautiful 18-hole golf course that they could play on. So Cheryl and Ted and I found a dive shop in Nassau, and we walked in there and, you know, set up a dive. They had somebody already waiting at their boat, had no customers that day. It was kind of a hot day in June, and about June 11th, I think it was. And so it was a real hot day, so they had no customers. They were happy to arrange for us to go onto the dive. And so he gave us directions to find this gentleman who owns the captain of the boat, who could take us out to a sunken ship that was only about 30 feet below the surface. So it wasn't a real deep dive. And we've got down there, we found him. He had a nice boat all set up, and very tall, black Bahamian man. And he fired up the engines, and we set sail for the spot way out, you know, far away from the island of Nassau, but not so far that you couldn't see Nassau. And you could also see the ship, the big ship that was docked outside of Nassau. because it was too big to come into their docks. So anyway, we got out there and he found the ship, and he went below to get the equipment, all the tanks, all the equipment that we needed. So he, one by one, he brought up 3 sets of equipment, and Ted and Ted and Cheryl, I mean, were being advanced divers with great skill and experience, put on their equipment very quickly, whereas, you know, I'm still messing around with the equipment, doing what I had been taught, but, you know, I'm still unsure. So, you know, I said to the 2 of them, they were ready to go, and I was still like monkeying with the tanks and stuff. I said, look, don't wait for me. I'll catch up. You guys go down and start enjoying the dive. It's right below us, so I'll have no problem finding you. So they did. They went down. I took my time getting my equipment. I tested everything, tested the air, did all the things I was taught in the course to make sure the air was good, to make sure the regulator worked properly, everything worked well. So when I was finally all set, I did the back flip into the water and started heading down. At first it was a little murky, but you could still see the silhouette. Actually, you could see the silhouette of the sunken ship from the boat, because the water was clear enough that you could actually see it above water, even though it was down 30 feet. So it was pretty clear water. And so I started to proceed down to descend towards the ship. I could start seeing bubbles coming up, so I figured that was where my 2 dive mates were. And so I started swimming towards them. And as I did, the bubbles became a lot thicker, more bubbles than I had ever expected to see. And as they started to get into my vision, I could see their silhouettes. I couldn't see who was who, but bubbles were coming from them at an erratic pace. So I swam faster. I thought something's wrong. Instinct told me something is definitely wrong. And I started really swimming down faster towards them. And as I got close enough so that I could actually see them clearly, what I saw was Ted had his hands on Cheryl's regulator, which was not in her mouth. And Ted had no regulator in his mouth. And it looks like they were playing tug of war over her regulator while the bubbles were flying out. So Lori didn't even have a mask on. That had apparently been taken off or knocked off. But she was fighting to keep her regulator, and he was fighting to get it from her. And then there was a commotion. It seemed like he punched her in the head. But that part I'm a little vague on, because how do you punch somebody through water when you're down 30 feet? I don't know, and make it count. But she passed out. After that action, which appeared like a punch, she was unconscious. And so she slumped onto the top of the floor of this sunken ship. Meanwhile, he, not having a regulator, her regulator, literally just shot to the top as fast as he could, which I knew was a very bad decision on his part. But at this point, I think he was desperate and panicking. I went to Lori. Pardon me. I went to Cheryl. Lori's golfing. I went to Cheryl, the diver, the mother, and she was completely unconscious. Her regulator was floating there next to her, bubbles coming out. So I took her regulator and I put it in her mouth. And I waited to see if she would exhale. But she apparently wasn't drawing the air in or exhaling at all. And I waited for a while to, hope she would start to, take air in, but she didn't. So finally I decided I had to get her to the surface. Now, being green, being a novice scuba diver, it did not occur to me to take her equipment off. I didn't ditch well, of course I didn't ditch I'm still breathing out of my tank, but I didn't take hers off. And so I had to drag her up, and it was very difficult, with her tank on. It was one single tank, but you know, it added weight, and it was hard to get my arms around her well. But I managed, and I worked hard, and it was difficult, but I got her to the top. By the time I got her to the top, I was working to keep her head above water. So I had to grab her hair in order to roll her head back to get her chin out of water and get her mouth out of the water and keep it out so that she could breathe. But she wasn't breathing. And in fact, she was starting to turn a little bit purple. I knew she was in danger of dying from, you know, asphyxiation. And then to make matters worse, the waves had picked up, the wind had picked up, and water was coming over her face constantly. I still had my regulator, so I was fine, but I took my regulator out and I yelled as loud as I could to the boat captain, "Help, help, help, we need help." Well, he dove in, bathing suit on, and that's it. And he dove in and swam out to us to help. And so the two of us grabbed he grabbed one arm, I held onto the other arm, and I had my hand on her head, trying to keep her head above the water surface. But the waves kept getting worse. And we got about halfway back to the boat, which probably had drifted about 100 yards. We got halfway back to the boat, and I could see the boat captain. He started yelling to me, let her go, save yourself." And he let go, and he swam back to his boat. Well, I did not let go. I held on to her. I wasn't going to let her go. I mean, at this point, even though I'd only known her about 4 or 5 days, I felt like she was a friend, and I wasn't going to abandon her. So I kept her head above water, even though water kept going over it. I could not see her breathing at all, but I swam her back to the boat, and where he was waiting with his arms over the side of the boat. And so I got her to the starboard side, and then he grabbed her arms, but she was way too heavy to lift up onto the boat. So I went around to the back and got into the boat, and then the two of us grabbed her arms, and we pulled her up onto the boat and into the boat onto the floor. He had taken her tank off and threw it to the side, so now I had her flat on her back. And I asked him if he had anything to get her heart started, to help, and he did not have any type of equipment whatsoever. And I asked, "Do you know CPR?" And he said, "No." I don't know how you're a boat captain and you don't know CPR, but I did, because that was part of the course I'd just taken. So I knew CPR, and I started to give it. Now, this is 1983, and CPR in those days was quite different than it is today, but that's a different story. So I started giving her CPR the way I had known, and meanwhile, Ted came back and climbed on board, but he was of no help because he got so sick that he was throwing up over the side, just puking and puking. So he was of no help. I gave her CPR, and I gave her CPR, and I gave her CPR, and I kept doing it. And while I was doing it, because she was a friend now, I was praying. Every time I was doing chest compressions, I would yell to God. I would yell, "Dear God, please, do not let her die. Please do not let her die. She has a daughter who needs her. Please, Lord, do not let her die." And then I'd give her 5 more breaths, and then I'd start the chest compressions again shouting to God, "Please do not let her die." And I had kept doing it. Now her eyes were bulging out of her head. When we took her out of the boat, that was the thing that really struck me and stuck in my mind forever, was the sight of her eyes bulging lifelessly, no blinks, just two staring eyes at you. And on her back, I could tell in between the chest compressions and the breathing that her complexion had turned from purple more of a pink normal color. So I thought at least we're getting blood flow, to her head. So I kept doing it. That was an encouraging sign. She wasn't breathing, but I was doing that for her. And I think this went on. I began to become so exhausted. And every time I could, I yelled to God, please save her, save her, save her. The boat captain had no radio. That was the most surprising part. How do you not have a radio on a boat like that? How do you not have a radio to call for help? But he didn't. So about, 45 minutes, seemed like an hour, went by. And all of a sudden, she coughed and a burst of water came blowing out of her mouth. And that was the first sign of life. And I could tell she was kind of waking up, and she kept coughing. So I turned her on her side so that it was easier for the water to come out of her lungs and out of her mouth and onto the floor of the boat. And I patted her on the back as best I could to help that process. And she was coughing, and that was a good sign. She was coughing, and that meant she was alive. And so I patted her some more, and she now was breathing on her own and coughing a lot of water. Not communicating, but definitely breathing and definitely coughing out what she's breathing in, along with the seawater. I thought this was a miracle. Now, this is the part that I have to tell you today that I normally don't tell people when I tell this story, because this is the part that only I for sure can know actually happened, and you as the listener of this story may have their doubts, and I'm sure many do, and that's fine. But this is the part of the story that changed my life. As I'm yelling to God, and I'm giving her mouth to mouth and chest compressions alternately, suddenly I felt something really bizarre. It's the only way I can describe it. Really bizarre go through my body. It was just the strongest feeling, and it was a pleasant feeling, not a painful one. It was very pleasant, and it went through every part of my body, and it seemed to go into her as I was giving her mouth to mouth. And that's when she came to life. Now that part of that story stuck with me, because I knew at the moment that happened that was God. Was it the Holy Spirit? Was it Jesus Christ, because I probably called his name out many times? Or was it God the Father? I don't know, but it doesn't matter, because I knew it was God. And God used me to save her. God saved her that moment. God saved her. And I was the vessel that he used. As time went on, well, let me tell you the rest of the story. So I told the boat captain when she was breathing, take us over to the ship. You could see the ship. It was pretty big, huge ship, gigantic ship. So I said, take her over to the ship. They have a hospital on board. It was closer than Nassau was, quite a bit. So we went over to the ship, and he started honking his horn, which is the only signaling device he had. He started honking his horn, and we yelled and screamed. The boat captain and myself yelled and screamed, trying to get someone's attention on board the ship. But that ship was many stories taller than we were, and literally nobody heard us. There was no response, nothing from any human being. And so finally we said, we got to go to the hospital in Nassau. So we turned the boat and went back to Nassau, back to the docks where he kept his boat. And as soon as we got there, we were able to call for help, and help soon arrived. The hospital was very close by. So an ambulance came and took her and myself to the hospital. Also, the other ambulance took Ted to a hospital, but I never saw him again. So I'm not sure, maybe they took him to a different department in the hospital. But they rushed her, when I got in, they rushed her in to ICU or somewhere and started working on her. She was breathing, but she was still very, very sick, and I think they felt still at high risk at this point. So I sat out in the lobby while they were working on her, and I thought, I need to get word to her daughter, Lori, and my wife. So I used the hospital's phone at the receptionist's desk, and I was able to get patched through to the golf course on Paradise Island using Nassau's operator. They called and they got me through to the clubhouse of that golf course, and I told them what had happened, and I asked them to go out and find Lori and my wife, who were out golfing somewhere on their course. And I told them to explain to her that there had been an accident and that her mother was okay, but in ICU in the Nassau hospital. Well, apparently, you know how that old telephone thing is. By the time that got relayed to Lori and my wife, the message got twisted so that she was told that her mother had drowned and that she should go to the hospital, but she had passed away. And so for Lori, that was the most devastating news. She was a single child. She had no brothers and sisters. She lost her father just a few weeks earlier, and now she's suddenly told that her mother had drowned in a diving accident. You can imagine. She's barely 21 years old. You can just imagine how awful that was for her to hear. And so maybe an hour or so passed when taxi rolled up and to the front doors of the hospital, and I was right there to greet them as they got out of the taxi. And she was like bawling. And so when I realized what she thought, I said, "No, that's not right. Your mother is alive. She's still alive. She's in ICU." And of course, can you imagine the swing of emotion? And so I took her back and I knocked on the door for ICU, and the nurse came and I said, "This is her daughter. Can she come and see her mother?" And they let her in. And I stayed outside in the lobby with my wife. And she was in there. And a lot of crying. I think by this time her mother was able to speak, so she was talking, although very hoarse, very difficult for her to talk. But they were talking. And then a little while later, Lori came out and said to my wife and I, she said, can you come in, please? My mom wants to talk to you. So we did. We went into the ICU, and she grabbed my hand and she said, thank you. And I smiled. God, I felt so good. And she said, but I need one more favor from you. And I said, sure, anything. Anything, Cheryl. What? Just tell me. She said, promise me you won't leave Lori here in a foreign country alone. And I looked at my wife and I didn't know what to say. She said, Tom, I'm going to die. I can feel it. I'm not going to make it. Please promise me. So I looked at my wife and we had to go out because our ship was sailing and they sail. If you're not on board, they sail without you. And they were sailing in about an hour. So we went out into the lobby and we talked. I said, what do you think? She said, I think you need to stay. I'll go back because all our belongings are on board. I'll go back to the ship and I'll meet you in Miami, which is only the day after tomorrow. I said, are you sure? She said, you have to stay here. You can't leave Lori here. She needs you. So that's what happened. And I went out to tell, or went inside ICU, to tell Lori that we had decided that I would stay. Now, there's a part 2 to this story. But if I tell you it today, it will take a very long time and make this too long of an episode. So I'm going to tell you, I promise, I'm going to tell you part 2 in the next episode, part 2 of this story of Tom's Tall Tales, okay? I promise you, it will pick up right where we left off. But I spent the night in the waiting room with her mom. By the next morning, she was better. She stayed there another night. And then eventually I flew back from Nassau back to Miami and met my wife in Miami, and all was good, and we went home. It's what happened between those two. What happened on the day between that accident and going home. That is part 2 of this story. But that part of the story, that experience, part 1, what you just heard from me, especially that moment where I felt God going through my body and into her body. That was the monumental shift in my spiritual journey. You see, I had lost my way. I told you about Michael. Well, the experience with my son Michael was so devastating to me that I couldn't understand how God could punish me for my sins by making Michael so sick for the rest of his life, so terribly, terribly sick. And I was angry with God for punishing this innocent child, my son. At first, my only son, until the other boys came along. But I was so angry with him for punishing me by harming Michael. I blamed God for that. And I'd lost my way. But later I came to realize, 10 years later, 1983, that God had not left me. I may have left God, but He had not abandoned me. As a matter of fact, He had a plan for me. In 1983, He needed me. So I truly believe that the reason I didn't run in Grandma's Marathon was God's intervention. He needed me somewhere else. He planted the idea in my head to take that cruise. He needed me there. And I was the instrument of His saving Cheryl's life. Now, about 3 or 4 years later, we were in Tampa, Florida, had moved. We'd moved to Tampa in '86. So I got a visitor, and that visitor was Cheryl and Lori. They flew from Dallas to come meet with me, and we went out to dinner. And they were both very, very thankful, and that's why they came, to thank me for what I had done. And I explained to them, that it wasn't me, that they needed to thank God. I was just God's tools. I was His instruments. But it was God that made all of that happen. She was not, it wasn't her time yet, and her daughter needed her. And I think they really were moved by that. I think they really were moved by that. And I think they believed me. And when they said goodbye and left, I really feel like they felt, for the first time in their lives, that it was God who intervened to make sure she had more years with her daughter. I really think that was an epiphany for Cheryl and for Lori, as it was for me. So, I want to thank you for listening to that very critical time in my life, and especially in my spiritual journey. I want to close with inviting you to give me a call, as always. I really enjoy listening to those comments that you have sent to me. If you want to call and leave me a voicemail, the number is 813-776-6774, or drop me an email at tfeely, that's Tfeely, at me.com. And don't forget about my book. I'd love to have you go to my website, feely.life, buy my book, buy the 2 previous books if you haven't already. That's my only source of income now. I don't ask for any money for this podcast. Never will. If you feel like buying my book, I'd be honored to send my book to you. So now, my friends, you know the true story. Good night, and stay tuned for part 2 of this story.